right, guys, welcome to the Ravit Show. Very happy to have Moses Guttman as my guest today on the Ravit Show. Moses is the co-founder and CEO of ClearML. The mission of the company is to build and interface engineers and DevOps. I have been loving the content coming from ClearML, and a little about Moses. He is a computer vision deep learning guru and a serial entrepreneur with more than 20 years of experience making visionary technologies a reality. Prior to ClearML, he co-founded several startups in the machine learning embedded processing spaces. Moses is an alum of the Israeli Defense Forces most elite technology unit and has 40 patents and patent applications and 5 academic publications in his name. Moses holds an MS cum laude in computer science from Tel Aviv University. Today we will be discussing about his journey. Definitely I want to learn more about his prior engineering experience and now how does it feel to be a CEO of the company. Also, we'll be discussing more around the open source data management, experience management, orchestration, and MLOps. So feel free to have your questions coming in. We'll be taking it as well. Also, a quick announcement for the audience who are joining us. We will be giving away one annual subscription of 365 Data Science. Feel free to mention where you're coming from and also put a hashtag 365 Data Science to enter the raffle. We'll be announcing the winners towards the end of the show. All right, let's not make our guest wait anymore. Moses, welcome to the Ravit Show.
Hey, Ravit. Pleasure to be here. How are you?
I am very well. Such a pleasure to have you here, Moses. I was just first of all, 40 patents. That's super huge on your name. Obviously, we'll get into the weeds about how all of these things happen, but to start with, why not introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So I'm Moses. I founded ClearML 2.5 years ago or so. Before that, I did a lot of machine learning and computer vision back in the day where Python was not the main language to actually run machine learning, and I witnessed this entire path from kind of academic to the industry, which is amazing. And now we're building MLOps infrastructure to actually take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Also, first, I also had a very interesting question. How did ClearML as a name come to your mind? What was the reason behind it?
I think we took a vote internally on everyone came up with names and we took a vote. And I think the last vote that we did was a Twitter poll, which was awesome. We kind of thought, okay, that kind of makes sense. Let the audience decide. And I think that was the name that was picked. We had a few, we had 4 options and ClearML won with stars. So we picked it.
Amazing. This is the most interesting story behind a name that I've ever heard. To go internally and then go on a poll. Wow.
Yeah, we're true believers in the community, and when you can actually get feedback from your target audience, that's awesome. And this is kind of at the roots of the company, and this is what we did when we had to find a name as well.
Wow, this is amazing. Also, in terms of it's not surprising that common to open source an entire product in the MLOps field. But what motivated you to take that decision? Would love to know a little more around that as well.
Right. Surprisingly, it is not as common as people think. I mean, Python packages are by default open because of the way of the language, right? You cannot actually hide the code itself. Even though we have seen some companies try, they ended up saying, okay, it's a waste of time. So it's not only just opening the client end, but also the back end and the UI. And we had a lot of internal discussions on that. But at the end, what won is us as target audience as well. So we are all engineers. Everyone is an engineer in the company. And we would never actually adopt something internally in such an important role as MLOps, as a server that you implement internally inside the company's network without transparency. And open sourcing this entire thing, it's all about creating trust and discussing potential avenues to take with our community. And that is so important to us. So at the end, this won the kind of the debate whether are we cannibalizing our own market, etc. But at the end, it's just we're gaining more users and feedback, and at the end, we're developing a better product with it. So
Amazing,
this is
Gaurav.
the
And
it was a tough decision to make.
yeah, exactly. Just going open source, but that's how I think you grow. And if you believe in the community, that's something obviously a great decision to take. That's amazing. Also, since you are coming from a MLOps background, MLOps wasn't even a thing. When we talk about open source in late
No, it was
2019.
not. It was
Exactly.
not. It was not. When we started, it was. I remember discussion with potential users on why they should. Like the first step with MLOps is just creating transparency into the process of development itself, and just the first discussions on is TensorBoard enough or not. And I remember them, and I remember that for a lot of users, TensorBoard was enough. Because when you're working in small scale and you're a single individual, whether you're working inside a large company or not, there is actually no need for something that is larger than that. And if you do not have to deliver like a model for production, then the fact that you're kind of messy is not that bad. I mean, that's the way that development works. So the first thing that we did was to open source the experiment management part of the system. So we already had the orchestration and the automation, but we wanted to start gradually and aim where the problem is at the moment in the market. And we have seen that just collaborating, like two people, just two collaborating, is actually challenging. And this is kind of the first step that we took is open sourcing that part. And then we kind of expanded and took more things that we developed internally and open sourced them and kind of made them accessible to our community.
Oh, and when we talk about this term MLOps, obviously people are now starting to get more aware about how MLOps work in the machine learning ecosystem. But what is it to you? What does MLOps mean to you?
Yeah, that's. I guess it's constantly changing. If you were to ask me the same question a year ago, probably get a different answer. But from what we understand or the way that we perceive things, basically, it's MLOps is a paradigm shift in software development more than anything. So when we think about software development, we're all software engineers in our background. And when we think about software development, we think kind of a linear progression where you build on top of your previous version, you expand, you create features, etc. But you always go forward, and your only input comes from product, basically. Like here's a new feature or a bug to fix, but let's put bugs aside. But when it comes to machine learning, the paradigm really shifts. So even bugs, for example, what is a bug in machine learning? It's like really, we found a use case where the model just ill predicts. That's the bug. Okay, how do I there is no single line to fix it. The entire process become kind of a cyclic process where you constantly have to feed more data to fix bugs in the system. And the same goes for a new feature. You say, okay, I have new data point that I want to add. That becomes a challenge in terms of data, not actually the model. For the model, in a lot of cases, that's totally transparent. So when we think about MLOps, we think about the infrastructure that allows you to do that relatively easy. So instead of manually, okay, let's take a bug, for example, like a model bug, which is ill prediction. So we want to say, okay, for some reason, the model predicted X and we got Y. It doesn't really matter if this is internal testing or it comes from production. Okay, what can you, there is no line of code to change. you start to go back and say, okay, so I need to collect more data. What's unique about that specific cohort that represents a new type of data that the model fails in, or where the model, or what can represent the data the model was trained on, so we can expand it. And that becomes more of a theoretical question rather than implementation. Once you understand that, you want to say, okay, let's just run it again. Right. And it's a lot easier to say than to actually build that, because rerunning a model on new data basically means that you have an entire system underneath that can take the original code base and run it and push in the new data. It means that you have the old data and the new data, which is, in today's standard, is unique. And this entire thing, from our perspective, it's actually an engineering challenge rather than kind of a machine learning challenge. But these days they're entwined one with the other, and you cannot differentiate. And this is to us, at least as MLOps, is this notion of abstracting enough of the process so you can replicate the entire thing, and then automate and go back, etc.
Wow, this is super insightful. Thanks for sharing that, Moses. Also, we have a few questions coming in. We have a question from Kate here. She's asking, who's the target user for this?
Oh, that is a very interesting question. So for us, the target user at the end, these are engineers. So some platforms are for data analysts, which means that a lot of things are prepackaged and simplified.
Right.
We are targeting actually engineers. So people writing code, bottom line, whether these are data scientists, ML engineers, or DevOps, if they're writing code, these guys are our target audience, as opposed to a more, think of it as out-of-the-box solution, feeding data, feeding model, and we run it. We empower the engineers so they can create this simplified interface inside their company. So users inside the companies, think like business units, data analysts, can use a process that was done internally inside the company that is fully custom to their needs.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And a great question there, Kate. Thanks for the question. All right. Also, since even though MLOps is still relatively a new term, there are multitudes of companies already in the field. So what do you feel has changed in the last 2 years? How has it actually evolved?
Right. So and this is based on our very narrow perspective, so take it with a grain of salt. But what we see is companies actually broadening their product line. So if 2 years ago, every company was doing a very, let's call it a niche solution in this entire very broad field, these days we see more and more companies expanding, because at the end, from the user's perspective, best of breed is very hard and challenging to implement and adopt. Trying to kind of sync together different solutions is very challenging. So a lot of companies in the field are trying to expand their capabilities just so it's easier on their customers.
Okay, that does make a lot of sense. Okay, let's take this. Okay, I have a question in the audience, but let's take this one. So in terms of, obviously I know for a fact where ClearML stands out there and, does a lot in the MLOps space. So, but how do you differentiate yourselves from other solutions in the market? Because there are multiple solutions and there are different business problems that each of the companies are solving. So how do you differentiate ClearML there?
So I think our holistic approach is very different. We think of this entire process as a process, and again, targeting engineers, but still a very broad process that we need to cater to all the different steps alongside this process. Otherwise, it's on the shoulders of the users to actually do the connection. So for example, we think of the experiment management as an internal part of MLOps, because we think of it as just a way to create visibility into the process. It doesn't actually mean that it is an experiment, meaning you're testing something. It's more of a, we have to connect the code, the model, and the outputs together and somehow create this hub where you have all the information that you need always visible to you, right? And this is a totally different approach for a lot of other solutions out there. It's either the experiment management, which means, okay, this is only for development, or it's only, okay, how do we take the model from the model repository and run it inference, or how do we schedule or allocate a machine in order to run something? But for us, this is only a step along this process. And if you're missing the big picture, you're just missing this entire process. And we want to capture this entire process. And this is why everything is kind of embeds one into the other.
Okay. Yeah. That does make a lot of sense in terms of, how you are standing out there as a differentiator in the market, and the solutions are kind of different. So it does make a lot of sense. Harpreet does say, Harpreet is here. He's from Comet ML. Harpreet, welcome. He does say that experiment management is important. Thanks for that, Harpreet. Okay, let's take this question around MLOps from Aditi. Coming from a finance background, is MLOps applied in financial field yet?
I'm pretty sure that it does. I mean, there are a lot of companies doing, whether this is credit scores, fraud detection, this is all machine learning. And it's actually quite surprising. So back like 10 years ago, we had the same algorithms, only a few companies actually were able to implement those in production, because it is challenging. You do not want to mess up someone's credit score or the ability to take a loan, or too many red alerts on fraud detection. They're always, it's always very annoying for the users to get them, and obviously it impacts the bottom line of the company itself developing them. So 10 years ago, it was very challenging. These days, I think that with MLOps progressing so quickly, it becomes easier and easier to implement because it is more accessible, meaning the algorithms themselves are more accessible. The difference between developing an internal algorithm and actually deploying it is relatively small. Like back in the day, you developed an algorithm that was in Mathematica or MATLAB or something, and then taking it into production was giving it to someone to actually implement. These days, just Python code. You can take it directly into production. And we have enough experience in order to put some belts and suspenders on the performance of the model. So when we deploy it, we can get feedback. So I think that these days it's a lot easier to take to the next step. And I think that we're seeing it. I don't think that any large financial institute is not using machine learning in some way or another.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that question, Aditi. And definitely, MLOps is being used in a lot of financial fields. Okay, my next question to you is, what do you think makes machine learning different from other areas of software engineering, that it needs own set of tools? So what is that?
Right. So I would say it's the intrinsic relationship between the development and production. So in traditional software, there is it's very linear. You develop it, you have a QA process, which means you are aware of all the different scenarios, give or take, and then you check it, and then you say, okay, here's our next version, and it's there and it's static. But with machine learning, it's not static anymore. Just try to test your model, or maybe a model is just one step along an entire process. It becomes very challenging. That means that you're actually testing them in production. You're always testing them in production. There is no way not to do that, because the data constantly changes. So even if you took like a snapshot from the production data, you do not expect to get the same data the next day. So if I'm referencing the finance field from the previous question, we do not expect the performance of a stock to remain the same or to repeat itself, right? It's a stochastic process. That means that this entire move from development into production becomes a process where they have to constantly transfer information from one to the other, which means that we have to have a new set of tools that allows us to do that as quickly as possible. Otherwise, bugs are stuck, and we don't want bugs to be stuck in these type of systems. Right. So I think that you need an entire new approach to the development process itself. So it's not really development as much as a process that is constantly changing. And this is totally different from traditional software development or hardware development, where it's kind of steps one after the other.
Okay, that is definitely very fantastic insights coming in, Moses. Okay, let's take this question, actually, very interesting one from Manisha here. Great discussion. How is MLOps changing the face of machine learning today? Wow.
I think it makes it more accessible. So if before only a handful of companies were able to take machine learning processes and implement them in their products, these days, we really witness a proliferation of this field because it becomes so accessible and easy. And it moves from the research department, oh, we develop a model that predicts A based on B, whatever, into, oh, that becomes a feature in the product itself. This is how we improve the next version. And I think this change in the last couple of years made it from kind of a theoretical feature that can be implemented, oh, we're all doing AI, etc., to something that is actually being implemented relatively quickly and are pushed into a whole different set of products, from our ADAS cars systems to predictive maintenance on IoT, etc. And these are not complicated things to begin with, but making them as part of a process becomes very challenging.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, Manisha, I'm sure that answer is superb and you got it right. So also would love to, follow up that question with another question that I have, Moses. What, when we talk about MLOps, obviously there's something that DataOps comes up, or maybe DevOps comes up. So what is that MLOps can do that DevOps or DataOps cannot do?
That's an interesting question where we, I guess, draw the line between them. They're all kind of mixed, one with the other. My view that might be a bit limited is when I think about DevOps, I think about provisioning machines and storage at the end and making sure that these are working. And what they are doing is less important to me. So meaning, if I have a machine and the machine is up and running and not crashing, temperature okay, storage is working, blah, 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 I'm good. But then the question is, what is this machine is doing? That's a different question. And that's a question that is more from the MLOps perspective. This is more of an MLOps question. Right. Okay, do I utilize well the CPU? Like, for example, an example from real life. If you have your DevOps people, they'll tell you, oh, you cannot hit 90% CPU. Like, it's too dangerous. Like, the machine will drop. But from an MLOps perspective, is no, that's perfect. We want to utilize the entire CPU. If we're not hitting 90% or 100%, that means that our algorithm is not very efficient. So just the same metric viewed from different angles kind of tells a story of we're looking at from a totally different perspective. So this is, at least to me, DevOps. DataOps is a totally different challenge, which I think kind of overlaps MLOps, and I guess in some organization it's the same. But piping data into this entire process sometimes means that you have to interact with production systems and databases that are, for lack of a better term, out of scope from an MLOps perspective. So how do I query the data, make sure that I don't ruin the database, or maybe create a spike in usage just making sure that the data is accessible for this process, maybe normalize the data. This becomes a DataOps operation. And I think for a lot of users, they kind of expect to get the data somehow so they can build the model on top of it. And this is kind of the differentiation. But I assume that as time goes by, they'll kind of merge into something that is more holistic, because they are tied. I guess it's a bit synthetic, this separation between these three.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of, I had like a question around DevOps. So how do you see the DevOps field expanding towards ML? Will it be happening like soon? Is it already there? How does that,
That is interesting. I think that we've seen, and again, this is how we perceived it. Kubernetes, for example, entering the field of MLOps. So I remember when Google first released Kubernetes, it was terrific. It was basically, here's a way to scale servers and deployment on the cloud, which is transparent and gives you all the tool set that you need in order to do that. Then we had MLOps saying, okay, we actually have to still scale or provision machines. Let's just use Kubernetes for that. They know how to provision machines. And then DevOps kind of made, so DevOps teams are the go-to teams in order to do that. But from our perspective, sometimes it's not a perfect fit. So from a DevOps perspective, a service should be up and running and up there constantly. Basically, if you needed that service, it should be up there. From a machine learning operation perspective, this is just a job to perform. So it became that Kubernetes is kind of a more of an HPC solution where you have jobs and you need to schedule them, and Kubernetes just becomes a solution that is relatively popular, but probably was not designed to do that. And what I think will happen is DevOps will try to find better solutions, or maybe another layer on top of Kubernetes, expanding the capabilities of Kubernetes in order to achieve that, or deployment or provisioning of systems, just to cover the ability to launch jobs, more of an HPC workflows that currently are kind of, and forgive me for saying that, hacked together on top of Kubernetes, but Kubernetes was not designed to do that. Just scheduler, for example, is missing from Kubernetes. There's no way for you to know which job will be executed before the other. Like, there is no order. So I think this is what's going to happen, like a solution that is a better fit, and then DevOps teams learning more on the use cases of machine learning and deep learning in order to actually adopt these solutions.
Okay, these are really fantastic insights around, going back to Kubernetes and how it started and what it is right now. Moses, very interesting. I'm sure the audience kind of love the, the backstory that you have actually explained and what was the motive behind. So very helpful. Okay, let's take a few questions from the audience as well. I know George is here and he has a fantastic question. Would ClearML put MLOps more in the hands of data scientists rather than data engineers?
Yeah, it would actually. So our, I love that question. So that was actually one of the goals of ClearML was to make MLOps, or let's think of it as kind of the automation portion, more accessible to data scientists, because at the end, what we have seen and what we have witnessed, at the end, you have your data science team, and then you have that person that knows how to run Docker, and they become the MLOps guy. Because they have like this extra ability that maybe is not very trivial for the others, and they become kind of the chain or the loop in the chain that connects the data science group with the DevOps, and ClearML will actually cater for them. So help them accelerate this process and adopt better or more sophisticated workflows without the need to become, I guess the other option is a Kubernetes guru. So
Okay.
yeah, so bottom line is yes.
Okay, fantastic. So definitely a lot for the data scientists as well. So nice question, George. Okay, let's pick this question as well from Aditi. Just very interesting to hear, since we have obviously spoken about how it started back, 2 years back, what was it and how it has evolved. But what about the future? Where do you see MLOps in the next 2 to 3 years?
I think that we will actually get to a place where we can start to seriously talk about continuous learning, which
Hmm.
means like an entire process that is maybe not fully automated, but almost fully automated, where you have triggers coming from production, triggering model, retraining, new data coming in, data being actually stored in a way that can be used directly by the model training processes. So I think that this is where we're going with it.
Hmm.
Whether this is fully automatic or manual, I guess that depends. But I think this is kind of the goal for a lot of companies, to have this entire process fully automated, which kind of
Right.
implies the continuous learning. And I think that we're just at the beginning of this journey. I think that for a lot of companies, MLOps for them is right now is a better utilization of their resources, whatever they are. So whether these are data scientists or compute resources, doesn't really matter.
Mm.
It's about utilizing them better, so becoming more efficient with usage. And I think that in the near future, we'll see kind of that shifts into automation of kind of an end-to-end process, like really an end-to-end process, not just getting an alert from your model that it's ill behaving, but to actually trigger a process based on that.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic, Moses. Also, that brings me to an important question, since we are talking about the future. What are your thoughts around and some of the most exciting developments that would happen in the MLOps community, and in the tool ecosystem? Where do you see that coming? Or maybe, in the
So
next
I
few
think
years?
that we will see more and more tools getting better insights from kind of a data perspective.
Right.
So you can think of it as it might be a model perspective, because you're feeding it different types of data. But I guess model explainability is a good title, even though
Mm.
it might actually talk about something else, like how the model works. But from a black box perspective, I think that we're getting there. Trying to understand where um, a model is successful, or in what types of data the model predicts the correct behavior, and in what it fails. And that means expanding the tool set on better understanding of the data itself. And I think that this also implies that for a lot of companies, they will have to adopt this abstraction layer
Hmm.
for their data. So, in order to actually achieve that, that means that you are able to feed different types of data into your model or your entire process. And that means that you cannot have an interface that is basically, here's a bucket, go over it. Like, we have to have like a finer granularity over
Hmm.
how we feed data in. And I think that the next set of tools that we will be seeing is better data management and data abstraction. So data access becomes another, let's call it API call, rather than, oh, here are the files. Because these
Hmm.
days it's basically, okay, we have the files, we'll just go over them and then run the model. If we were talking about offline. Um, and I think that this is something that we're starting to see right now, that coming from users trying to better understand performance of model, whether this is reporting of the model, so
Hmm.
things like dashboard. And on the flip side, better understanding of the data that the model actually use. So whether this is structured data or unstructured data, probably different tools, but still in the way create that visibility,
Right.
because at the end, the data science people will have to um, analyze that data and performance of the model from the data perspective.
Right. So it seems to me, at least, there are two main approaches when it comes to scaling ML: data driven and model driver. But like, what is your take on it, and where do you see fit into the paradigms? Like, what?
Right. So, as you probably can understand from my previous answer, we are kind of data-driven approach people. It's not that model-driven is not important, but rarely a different model will totally change the performance from, let's call it, from the kind of the product perspective. Usually, the main issue is the data being fed into the model. Let's assume that for the sake of this discussion that the whatever we have is actually working. So obviously, if you have a model that cannot do whatever you're expecting to get, so you go find a new one. But assuming that you have a model that is already working or working well enough, it's all about trying to figure out what is the driver for that model in terms of data. And
Okay.
then once you understand that, okay, so you can start to build things on top of it and maybe kind of expand. Okay, that model is only capable of generalizing X and not Y, which is fine. You can always build another one. But this realization comes from kind of playing around with the data, not necessarily like the model itself. And I think this actually changed before we had, and this is a good segue to like how MLOps started. So before we had large quantities of data, it was all very model driven because at the end, when your data is very limited and you still have to spend a day working on it,
True.
and you don't have more data, you'll just concentrate on the model itself. That's kind of what you can do. Whether this is manual feature engineering or just trying different algorithms, etc. But when data is not actually a limiting factor, it becomes more important. And these days, data is not a limiting factor anymore because we just collect so much of it that it becomes, and obviously it's more important that model driven approach is actually quite limiting because it means that you do not concentrate on the data, and data can actually scale, and model driven does not. So
Okay.
this is basically our take on it.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks for the clear explanation there, Moses. Super helpful for the audience sitting in here. Okay, also in terms of, I want to learn more about ClearML, but before that, let's take this question in terms of the seats as well. George wants to know: do you offer dedicated seats, or they can be concurrent?
And you mean on ClearML?
Yeah, on ClearML, I guess. Yeah.
So I think that they can be concurrent, depending, I guess, on the setup itself. But generally speaking, think of it as load on the system. So at the end, we're assuming that the seat creates something like any metric using the system. Obviously, you're not idling. So if you're not idling, it means that you're generating data or querying data on the system. And that generates a load, so you need more machines or a beefier machine or whatnot. And I guess that's the main driver here. So think like at the end, you want to get to a place where when people start, they start with a machine per user or a process per user. Because at the end, if I'm running the code myself, it'll be very hard to run two pieces of code simultaneously and monitor them. But when we think about MLOps, the entire idea is to actually automate these processes and run as much as possible in parallel to see what works best in terms of whether this is in terms of parameters or data or process, etc. And then seats are not as relevant as number of concurrent sessions. And I guess that's where we're taking it. So the driver itself is actually concurrent sessions.
Amazing. Also, in terms of the future, what's next for ClearML, and what is ClearML coming up with in terms of, getting to the next level in the MLOps space?
So we will be releasing very soon the user interface for our pipelines. So the ClearML pipelines is actually a way to think about running or executing your code on multiple machines. Like the assumption is every step in the pipeline is actually running on a totally different machine, and ClearML will do the serialization of data between them in a transparent way. So we are releasing a new user interface for it, so it like looks nicer on the web UI. Capabilities are actually relatively similar. So so yeah, so I think that's like the first thing that you can see on the website is as kind of the pseudocode of the pipeline. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see it. So this is the next thing. We are also working on expanding the ClearML serving capabilities, which means it is easier to add pre and post processing into the mix. We're not actually running the serving engine itself. We're just the control plane. And integrating with third-party engines for drift detection, that kind of stuff. And we're also working on expanding the, let's call it the data analytics capabilities of the system, because you're basically pushing a lot of data in the system, and we want to make sure that that data is accessible for you, so you can query it back, create your own dashboards. So now we're working on a solution that will allow you to do that more easily that now you can only with Pythonic API.
Amazing. In terms of, also just going back to the ClearML and it's, the stuff that you guys are doing, are you guys also planning to come up with any courses, or do you guys have resources where people can learn more about, or maybe blogs as well?
So we are constantly expanding our video library. So we're I think releasing a video per week these days. We also have we're working hard on it. Yeah, it's it is not
how
as easy as one would expect.
It is to come up with videos every week is like unreal to me, at least when a company says so, because there's so much in the space which is happening, but every week is fantastic. So
yeah, well, they're not long. Yeah, they're not long. They're kind of I'm with you. Like coming up with an hour video every week is not realistic. So these are just bits and pieces, like nuggets of information on the system itself and how you can work on it. Yeah, no, an hour a week. I wish. And we also have a community, so you can join our Slack channel. It is very active. So you can ask questions there, general questions on MLOps, like what people are building, ask for general advice, regardless of ClearML also, because just we have a lot of people building really large setups. And obviously you can learn more on ClearML as well, but it's down there with the join our community, I guess, Slack. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. This sounds interesting. You guys have more than 1,000 folks already in the community, and I can share the link with the folks attending so they can actually join. Yeah. Right. This sounds good. Also, quickly wanted to understand in terms of this question that I had was around how can someone learn more about scaling their ML infrastructure. This I kept for the while we wrap this up, but
right. I guess so. Ask on the community channel. That's for sure a good thing. Like people just explain how they build it, which I think it's the best to learn from someone else's experience. By now, they'll be able to tell you where they got things wrong, and maybe you can learn from it, right? I would also go to the NVIDIA GTC talks. They have a few on MLOps. And and generally speaking, I would stay away from MLOps on Kubernetes, as in general, on scaling things up. Yes. I mean, learn about it, but not start there. It's too complicated to start with. And it is important, but you should not start there.
Okay. That's a great tip. Yeah. And that comes out of experience. So I'm sure people would, folks would love to, take that on. If it's confusing, definitely not start there, but maybe down the line once you get into it and then learn more about it would make more sense. So It
Exactly. And I
is.
would say
Yeah.
start small. Whatever you're doing, pick a small project, start there instead of kind of thinking big, okay, this is what we want to build. Start small with iterative steps. Otherwise, it becomes this chore that no one will actually get to because you always have some more pressing things to solve.
Right.
So start small, even just okay. Let's just automate like a fraction of this entire process, just so we get an understanding on the value that it brings, or
Mm.
like the acceleration of development or whatnot. Otherwise, it's just it's such a huge goal to achieve, and it makes it inaccessible.
Yeah, definitely. It does make a lot of sense there. All right, Moses. I think I've learned a lot today about MLOps, about DevOps, about even DataOps, about ML infrastructure, and about ClearML. Definitely, I think ClearML is like way to go. You guys are doing a lot of stuff for the community in 100%, in terms of uh, say the blogs, even the videos, like you say, coming up with those small snippets every week means a lot. So I'll be definitely following all of those videos and making sure that I can get some golden nuggets in MLOps space from it. And also would love to see if you guys are coming up with any white papers, books, or blogs in the future. We'll keep a tap on that. So on the resources channel, and I would urge everyone to join the Slack channel so you guys can actually go in and interact with Moses if you have any questions directly with him and the team at ClearML. So yeah, it's fantastic. One last thing that I wanted to ask for the audience, Moses, was around if folks want to reach out to you, which is the best place. One is definitely your community where people can reach out. Other than that, which would be the best place?
Our Slack channel, hit me at Moses,
Hmm?
and I'm always there. So feel free.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Moses. This was super interesting and very insightful. Thanks for all the great, the great work that you guys are doing and the ClearML team is doing in the MLOps space. Such a pleasure to host you today.
A pleasure here as well, Ravit. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining and asking questions. It was a pleasure.